Hello everyone, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the Eachine Red Devil. This is an ultralight micro, and we're going to fly it around in the backyard like we normally do. It does come in a case like this, but the rest of the details we need to get down to the desk. Comes with the Crazy Bee F4 flight controller that has a 5 amp ESC, 16x9 Caddx EOS 2 camera, 1102 8700 kV motors with 2mm shafts, power switchable VTX from 25 milliwatts to 200 milliwatts, 5 bands and 40 channel VTX supporting 25 milliwatts to 200 milliwatts via smart audio, typical 65mm props, XT30 with a capacitor on the end. I routed the antenna up through the canopy. I also added these zip ties. It weighs almost 38 grams. With a stock battery, it weighs almost 63.5 grams. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting 105mm. Bottom plate is 2mm thick. Comes with 2 spare red zip ties, a screwdriver, extra bit of foam tape, 2 complete set of extra props, a prop remover, 4 extra motor screws, 2 extra nylon nuts and 1 extra nylon screw, and a full color, pretty well laid out instruction manual. We also get an Eachine branded 300 milliamp 3S battery. We're going to have about 3 minutes to talk about this flight, and some of this isn't going to necessarily be about the quad itself. So let's get to what we can. The first thing I want to talk about is the adjustment that it took for me. Because this appears to be another 16x9 camera, the vertical field of view is not very good, or at least it's not very good for me. So it took me a fair bit of adjustment. There were a few days where I really kind of got frustrated with flying this thing because I lacked that vertical field of view, because I'd be flying other quads that I was more accustomed to, and yes, I did clip that branch just there. And then when I go to fly this, I was flying it kind of sloppily, and I had a hard time keeping the nose down to keep that forward speed going. So what I ended up doing was just not flying anything else. This had to be the first thing I flew of the day. I couldn't fly something inside and then go out later in the day and then fly this. I had to have this one first, and I got better if I did that. Now, I also avoided flying some of those other quads in a couple of the days where I flew this one. I just didn't fly those others at all, and that helped me adjust a little bit. That's a little bit of an analogy that you may find sensitive. If you have a fleet of quads, the vertical field of view on these 16x9 cameras, it throws me off. It may not impact you in the same way, but it's something I thought I should bring to the table so that if you're purchasing or looking at something like this, that you can at least have some information about the adjustment that you may be undertaking. They must be deeply discounting these 16x9 cameras, because we've seen these crop up a few times. Now, I'm not a fan. I like the 4.3. Now I like the Runcam Nano 2 a lot better, so I would really like to see more Runcam Nano 2s. It could be a cost, price point thing. You know, I'm not involved in that sort of stuff, but if I were to retain this quad, the first thing I would do would be to swap out the camera to either the Caddx that's a 4.3 or the Runcam Nano 2, which has a greater field of view, and I enjoy that camera more. Some people enjoy the EOS coloration. This one seems to be pretty good. We don't get a lot of the red hues, but that really varies from a Caddx camera to Caddx camera. Sometimes you'll find one that has pretty good coloration, and other times not so much. Also, now that we're over 2 minutes into the flight, you probably notice a little bit of jello. Now, it was really bad when I didn't have those zip ties in there. And this was something I hinted to in my last video. When you've got a canopy that it doesn't hold the camera still, you're going to have to do something in order to stop it from having that jello, that waviness in it. That's not just glitching a video. And yes, I am flying at 200 milliwatts as well. Not all VTXs are created equal, even though it can pump out that much milliwatt, or at least report it does. It doesn't necessarily give us a clean signal at that. But back to the canopies, I think if you're going to keep this one, you have to get rid of the soft mounting and get some nylon standoffs in there and hard mount the board and then hard mount the canopy to it. That may help quite a bit. You may also end up stuffing some other substance between the camera housing and the board in order to stop it from having that jello. And that's something that we'll take a look here at the desk when we get done, as we're coming in at the end of this flight. So I had a pretty tremendous crash, and you see it coming up here. I just wang right into the swing set, and I have a battery ejection. And the very next flight, I have this. And you can see I've got a fair bit more jello than I did in the flight before that. Now, I could have a bent shaft. It could be my props, although I tried to straighten out the props. I didn't swap them out for fresh props. The props look pretty good. I didn't see that they were misaligned when I compared one prop to another, so I stayed with the same prop. It could have loosened up my zip ties a little bit, or the canopy might have loosened a little bit between the portion that holds the camera and the rest of the canopy. I'm not certain. I checked those things, but it just doesn't feel any different to me. So I really can't explain precisely why I have so much more jello in this flight following that crash. But again, it's one of those things I try to bring to the table so that you know if you experience a similar things, that maybe it's not unusual, or you can take a deeper dive into what might solve that problem in your particular case. I would start with fresh props and then inspecting your motor shafts, also making sure that your motors are securely mounted. Oddly enough, during this flight, I feel like I was flying a little bit better than in the previous flight that I showed you. Probably because this came later. You know, as I fly more and more packs on these things, I tend to get better and better and better, or at least more comfortable. Better, I guess, is relative or subjective depending upon who the viewer is. But I did feel that I was more comfortable flying this particular flight than I had been the previous ones, probably because this is about the 6th or 7th flight, I think, of this particular day. I could be off. It could have been our 5th or it could have been the 10th. I'm not certain. I have a number of these 3S 300 milliamp batteries, and I tend to just charge them all up one night and then go out and fly as many as I got time for the next day. So I mentioned it in the quick roll. I've got this zip tie, and it is pretty tight, but the wobble, I've still got a fair bit of wobble in there. And this is what it looked like before I used the zip ties. So if you've got Jello in yours and you want to get rid of it, there's a little nylon nut here. So you're going to need to buy yourself an M2 nylon standoff kit. Put one below the board, one above the board, and make sure you use a metal screw through there. Now, it doesn't come with a metal screw, so you're going to have to source that as well. You can find an M2 nylon kit from various hobby shops. You can also go to eBay or other sources to find M2 hardware, but that is what you're going to need because we need to firm this up to get rid of as much Jello as possible. Now, it's also possible that it's coming from here. So if you really wanted to fix that, glue it. Of course, you're going to lose your adjustment, so be sure that if you're gluing it, that you've got it where you want it, or you've got extra canopies to go to make an adjustment. Because it just, I don't know if you can see that very well. This moves as well. So we've got so much movement in here that it's just going to be, it's going to take a couple different changes in order to shore that up. Now, if we compare the frame to the Sailfly, which I have one of over here, we see that they've beefed up the motor area to where it's got more material around the screws. That's a good thing because it should assure you that your motors stay on the frame rather than breaking off. Of course, crashes always vary, and depending upon how you're crashing, what you're crashing into, and the size of battery you're carrying, it may still break, you never know. I also trimmed down the battery pad here. I did not want this going over these wires. I wanted my battery to go over rather than the pad to create more compression on this. I'm a little bit concerned with this sticking below here and this just being a foam pad, that we may want to use something that's stiffer, but then that's going to make it getting in here a little bit more challenging. So if you use a solid rubber mat, you may find that if you can get the right height, that your battery comes in right over the top of this. Because as we crash and that battery shifts, I'm worried about this connector kind of taking some sort of damage, and then maybe you lose OSD or you lose your camera altogether. There is a hair bit of room behind the flight controller for the USB port, so depending upon how much it shifts and crashes, that should be fine, or if you crash real hard, you may end up finding it taking a knock. Something else to be aware of. Also, I would secure these wires down for their motor wires. I found that from time to time they would come up if I pry them up. They don't get in the prop, but because they've got them twisted, that keeps them short. So if you untwist them, you'll probably have to secure them down or retwist them, one of the two. But as they get up, then a branch gets through there. If you fall through a tree or something like that, that's another opportunity for a branch to get stuck that makes it pretty difficult to get out. This has the Crazy Bee F4 board. I don't recommend using turtle mode unless you know for certain that your props are free and will rotate without binding, or you're in such a bad spot where the risk is worth the reward, and the reward being getting your quad back. The risk is not getting it back, but possibly having a dead board. So that's my spiel on turtle mode. Be careful. I did add a zip tie here to mount the VTX, get a little bit more up out of the way, because it initially just comes out here and it's kind of dangling around. Do that for certain, because your props will chop that sucker up if you do not. I did not spend any time tuning it. I felt it was controllable. Even though I struggled with the FPV camera, I probably wouldn't tune this too much more, maybe ever so slightly, maybe 2 or 3 values on pitch and D, depending upon what I find it's doing. In my flights, I thought the tune was pretty good. It wasn't spot on, but because these props are flexible, a lot of the tuning efforts won't make a huge difference, or you're going to have to change the numbers pretty big in order to see a difference, and then you might impact the performance as far as bounce back or smoothness, or controllability may become more robotic if you have to change your values too much. So something to be aware of. These motors do have mounting holes for traditional props, so you can use screws on different sorts of props. You can try the Lumineer props, which I have over here. They're a 2-inch prop. They're a much bigger paddle. I would say for 1102, I wouldn't recommend these necessarily. I've been flying them on 1103s, and I think they're pretty good. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for quicker response or more performance. I can't say exactly what I'm looking for. I just know that I'm looking for something else. Even though I've been trying these props out, I'm just looking for more. Could be the weight of this machine too. It's coming in at about 54 grams. Also, if you use the VTX in your OS, you'll notice that it always says 25 milliwatts when you're in disarm state, and that's because, just as they say in the instructions here, if I can get the camera to focus nicely, that they use VTX low power disarm on. So if you don't like that, turn that value off in the CLI. Don't forget to type save and then reboot your flight controller. Otherwise, it'll go to the higher power when you arm the quad. That's how they have this set up. Kind of a nice little feature. Maybe saves you a little bit of battery power. Maybe, as you're sitting on the ground. So what do you think? Am I crazy? Am I on point? What's your opinion on this? Do you have one? Leave your comment down below. If you have one, these have been out and available for a little while. I'm kind of late to the game of reviewing this. Leave your comment down below about your experiences with. If you have both the Sailfly and the Red Devil, definitely leave your comments down below. That's very valuable information to anybody who might come to the channel and have questions about either one of these quads. If you have any other comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching. If you're wondering about my lip, I got a blister from being out in the sun too much.